Hello and welcome to Potomac's webinar, aptly titled Branding is Hard, because it is. We're going to give people a few minutes to get into the room here. So before we get started, I thought I would just throw out to everyone, do you know the oldest brand in the world? Without using Google, of course. If anybody thinks they know it, throw it there in the chat. But it's an interesting story that we will come back to. I thought I would start by introducing myself. I am Christopher Norton. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Potomac. Prior to joining the firm 5 years ago, I spent a little over a decade working in the agency world. And I spent that time working with wealth management companies on branding, and a pretty wide spectrum of them. I worked with startup RIAs. I've worked with groups breaking out of a wirehouse and setting up their own shop for the first time. I've worked with 100-year-old companies who were updating their brand for a new generation. So I have spent a lot of time in this space, and it's very near and dear to my heart. I also think it's something that our industry tremendously undervalues, both in its actual worth and in connection to clients. So that's something that I want to talk about today. The other thing about branding is it's work that's never done. If you are running a great brand, you are never done with the branding process. We've had a couple of guesses for what the oldest brand in the world is. A publisher, a beer. Those are actually both great guesses and wrong. Close. It's definitely in that vein of older world companies, obviously, but that's not quite it. So I think I'll go ahead and jump in here. And one of the first things I want to call attention to is that moving forward, I'm not sure how well you can see that. We might maybe Martina make the slide bigger for just a second. We just, after an 18-month process, got the registered trademark back for Potomac's icon. So that is now officially ours. And I'm very, very excited that we don't have to worry about people copying, stealing our work. Comes up a lot, believe it or not. So that's an exciting piece for us. The first question that I want to ask is, how do you actually define brand? What is your definition of it? Because in my career, talking to people about it, everybody seems to have a different answer to this question. Is it your name? Is it your logo? It's your logo, right? We obviously just got ours trademarked. Everybody knows what this is, right? I don't have to put the name. I don't have to describe what it is. You automatically know what I'm talking about here. Is it your story? Is it yourself? Cult of personality is really big in today's world, as we know. And it can work really well for an organization for a while. For a while. Until your cult of personality person goes crazy or refuses to get treatment for cancer, or renames themselves after a stiff wind and starts having breathing retreats with people in the woods. I actually had, during my agency career, someone tell me once that firms are incapable of defining their own brand. Their brand is what their clients perceive it to be. And there is some truth in that, but it's also not quite the whole story. I would argue that all of those things are elements of branding, but not the definition of it. And all the time I've spent working on this, I've come to believe that your brand is every interaction that someone has with your firm. So yes, it starts with your name and your logo and extends to the colors that you pick for the website and the kind of imagery that you use and all of those things. But it's also the way you answer the phone, the feeling that somebody gets when they walk into your office or meets you face to face. Every interaction someone has with your firm is part of your brand, and it's something that should be carefully curated. I have a guest with me today not a big surprise. He was on the poster. Manish, welcome.
Thank you. Why am I here?
That's a great question. Obviously, this is something I have a lot of personal experience with, but it's something that we have been going through at Potomac, and I thought it would be valuable for us to share our journey, because a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in this webinar, it's not me going, you all need to think about branding more. I'm doing that motion with a thumb because I've spent my career doing this, and we've just done it as Potomac. And I think our journey is such a great example for people about how the work of branding is never done. It's something that you need to continue to revisit, because firms grow and evolve and they change. And the way you told your story 2 or 3 years ago is maybe not how you need to tell it today.
Well, also, let's clear up something. We don't sell marketing services, so there's not going to be a call to action with a free assessment that we can then circle back and create your website for you. We're not doing this for any other reason than we feel it's helpful for advisors, because we've been around long enough to look at the landscape and see how advisors struggle with branding. So, take it all with a grain of salt. We're not here to upsell any marketing services, nor do we want to. It's just our experiences and how they can be helpful to you.
For sure. And I think whenever we do stuff like this, I always like to start by looking outside the industry, because I think a lot of the things that happen in our industry kind of happen in a bubble. And we don't often step back and see what other people are doing. So I sort of gave it away if you can read Japanese. Do you know what the oldest brand is in the... I'm looking over here because it's actually sitting right next to me, but that didn't really work on camera. So do you know what the oldest brand is?
It looks like a boba tea logo.
So I know I'm going to butcher this from a pronunciation standpoint. It's Kanjo Gumi. Was founded in 578 AD. Yeah, somebody knows it. It's a construction company in Japan, and it's not a globally known brand, but it is very well known in Japan and is basically synonymous with quality and craftsmanship. And I encourage people to look it up after the webinar, because they have a very cool website. I couldn't read any of it, but it didn't matter because it was absolutely incredible. But they have had a consistent brand for, what would that be, almost 1,600 years. It's incredible. But in looking at what other people have done, I mentioned at the top that I think our industry undervalues brands, and there's something to be said for consistency and having something over a long period of time. And I feel like our industry, they don't really think the brand's important. They change it every few years. They change it when the business changes hands. They throw it away, and they don't value that brand equity that they've built up. This is one of my favorite examples. Bacardi has essentially had the same logo since 1890. Now it's evolved over the years, and their current one is actually kind of a throwback to some of their earlier versions of it, which I think is a very kind of now thing. But if you look at this, any one of those, you'd go, oh yeah, that's Bacardi. And that's a household name. And they have really not too much messed with that brand at any point. They didn't get to the 1960s and be like, bats are out. We're going to name it Card now because it's in the name, right? They've stuck with this and it's worked for them. Another really great example is McDonald's. If you've ever seen the movie The Founder with Michael Keaton, which is a great film, they had some early struggles early on, which I think is evident there at the top. But essentially since 1960, they've had roughly the same logo. Again, they tweak it over time. They change it so it kind of feels now. I think the most recent version of the logo isn't on here. It's the 2006 one in a red box. But they've essentially done this same brand for 60 years. And times change, diets change, people's perception of fast food has changed, and they've evolved the restaurant, and they've evolved their offering and their food and the way they do things and how you enjoy that, but the brand has stayed the same, and they valued that throughout the whole time. So that's part of this whole idea of keeping things familiar but fresh. And that brings us to Potomac. So when I joined 5 years ago, one of the first things that we did was figure out how we wanted to define our value proposition as part of branding. I think it's a great place to start, is sit down and get everybody on the same page. This is how we're going to talk about the firm. And we came up with this idea of conquer your investment risk. And we liked that word conquer. It's actionable. It brings I don't want to say it brings battle scenes to mind, but it brings a very purposeful action to mind when you use that word. And so that kind of grew into this phrase, built to conquer risk, which we also trademarked because once we started using it, all of a sudden other people started using it. So we trademarked that one really quickly. At the same time we did that, we also launched a TAMP. And we knew the TAMP needed to be a name. It couldn't just be Potomac TAMP. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how are we going to do this. It's still a part of Potomac, but it's its own thing, and we need a way to talk about it. And so, like I like to do, I looked at what other people are doing. And basically, I just straight up stole the idea from iShares. Because when iShares was sold from Barclays to BlackRock in, 2007, I want to say. BlackRock was like, okay, the iShares name has value, and it's known in the industry, and now it's ours, but we don't want to lose it because we don't want to lose the identity of iShares, but we want to have our name with it. So they did the very elegant solution of iShares by BlackRock. And this logo has evolved a little bit, I think, since then. This is the original. But it was a beautiful solution. It was very simple. And so we basically took that idea and ran with it. And we created our TAMP Union, and it was called Union by Potomac. And since then, we've launched other products and other things, and we've followed that same naming scheme. We have a new proposal software called Guardrails. It's Guardrails by Potomac. We have a research offering available to our clients. It's Research by Potomac. Very simple. We named our podcast after our tagline, Conquer Risk Podcast. We did that with our funds as well. And this was all very intentional work. This is something we spent a lot of time thinking about, how we're going to do this, how we're going to do this well. And this is what we created. And so when you think about this from a branding perspective, you just have this sort of mess of names and different kinds of things, and some of them are by Potomac and some of them are based off the tagline. And when we made them, it all made sense and it was all very intentional. But then you just end up with this word salad of things that don't really define a firm well. And keep in mind, all of these things were running off a website called potomacfund.com. Now, that made sense when the firm was founded a long time ago, and it was Potomac Fund Management. You're just looking for the shortest domain possible, so you pick potomacfund.com. But then we launched our own funds, which we named the Conquer Risk Funds to not create confusion, because, again, we thought that made sense. But then people see potomacfund.com, and they're like, oh, yeah, that's right. You guys have funds. That's all you do. Well, no, it's not. It's a very small part of what we do. Well, I guess I shouldn't say small part. It's a big part of who we are, but it's not the only thing that we do. And that was the confusion that was created. And so you see the mess that we had created for ourselves. We have all of these different naming schemes. We got this domain that doesn't really fit the firm. We needed to make a change. And this is where I think everyone gets it wrong. I have seen multiple firms, and I'm going to pick on one, get to this place that we got to and go, you know what? We just need to start fresh. We've boxed ourselves into a corner. We've created too much confusion on what our offering is, and we need to fix it. And I've always said, usually, unless you've done something really, really bad, and I mean like illegal bad, you don't have a branding problem. You have a storytelling problem. But over and over and over again, I see firms say, let's just, throw the baby out with the bathwater and come up with something new. And so you look at a firm like Riskalyze, which had probably the coolest name in the wealth management industry. It was a made-up word, so they completely owned it, and it described what they did. Analyze risk is right there in the name. It was brilliant. And they got to a place where they felt like it boxed them into a corner and people thought they were just the risk survey and
Well,
not all these
also
other
the
things.
logo, by the way, like I could see it right now in my head, the whatever the little hexagons or things that were next to each other. So they also did a really good job of on the logo side. Most people could recognize that being tied to risk glass.
It was an exceptionally well executed brand, and they brought those hexagons into everything. I mean, from their site design to the stage design when they did in-person events, it was all so well done. And they just decided it didn't work for them anymore, so they hired a outside the industry branding firm, and they named it Nitrogen, which they couldn't even get the domain for. So now it's Nitrogen Wealth, and they just lost all that brand equity that they had built over the years, and all the things that immediately came to mind to people when you said the brand, the relationship people had with it. They just lost it all.
And no shade to them. I mean, we actually look up to them in a lot of ways. I mean, in the early years when we were talking about branding and things, we would always look to them for how they created content and landing pages and things like that. Just an example of us being disappointed that they threw that brand equity out the window.
100%. And I'm going to go back to the original example that I gave at the top. When Nike entered the market, all they made was shoes. And then 10 years into it, they decided there was an opportunity to get into other types of athletic wear, different types of equipment and things. And they didn't step back and go, well, Nike's the shoe, and that's what everybody knows. So let's create a parent company above it called Sticks. Props if anyone gets the reference. And then we'll name all the different things, other things. No. They knew what they had in their brand, and they just built upon it. And so for Potomac, there were a lot of different directions we could have gone and talked about. We talked about, well, we've got this trademarked tagline. And what does, I'll just ask you this. I asked you when Potomac was founded in 1987, why did they pick the name Potomac? And you told me.
I don't fucking know. I was 7.
Fair. So, Conquer Risk was something that we created ourselves. We had ownership of. We really liked it. Why don't we just become Conquer Risk Capital Management?
The double R in the web name would have driven us both to suicide.
Just madness. It was awful. Conquer Risk. Yeah. So we're like, well, Manish has a big personality in the industry. People know him. He has a huge following. We could just name it, Khatta Kicks Ass, and that's the name of the company.
That was my vote, by the way.
And, just cash in on that, element of things. But we just kept coming back to 40 years of brand history. Do we really want to throw all of that away now to fix a problem that we've created? So instead, we went the entirely different direction and secured Potomac.com. Now that might seem like, well, that was an easy solution. Why are we even talking about this? Manish, do you want to tell people how much this cost?
Well, give me 2 seconds to back up. It was a long process. Potomac.com was owned by a local IT firm that we gently reached out to a couple times and then full on started harassing over a 3-year period because the emails were getting bounced. They weren't really even in business for the most part, but they wouldn't respond. And so we reached out through GoDaddy to secure the domain name. Probably the worst negotiation I've ever put on from a personal level. But when it was all said and done with GoDaddy's fees, this ended up being a $42,000 purchase.
So that's a big decision to make, right? To spend that kind of money just to really secure your own name. But what that did for us was give us an opportunity to bring everything into alignment. So from all of the different silos of our business that were already following the Potomac name, we can now do the same thing with our funds, which is something that we have on our roadmap. We have been working very diligently behind the scene for months now to prep this domain launch. It's one thing to just, have the website point to Potomac.com. It's another thing to change everybody's email addresses and your server and all of the things that run off of the domain. So we get to launch this on November 1st. So we're really, really excited for that at the end of next week. But this has brought everything back together for us. We still have our trademark tagline, but now everything we do is Potomac, and we have a unified brand. And we didn't lose the brand history. And we've used it as an opportunity to go back, and we're going to update our website and refresh our messaging, and our company has grown, and we want to continue having everybody talking about the firm the same way. Now, interestingly, this is something that I think every firm should do, from a one-person shop to somebody with 37 billion in AUM, who I've done this with. I said, you need to treat your brand with respect, because if you don't, you're undervaluing it. You're undervaluing what it is now. You're undervaluing the relationship your clients have with it, and you're undervaluing it when you go to sell the firm. Understand, we're working in finance, and people like to assign hard dollars to everything, and it's hard to assign hard dollars to a brand. But I got into an argument about this with Michael Kitces, and I'll share that story briefly. It was actually on Twitter, so it was super public. I made the case that people should not name firms after themselves, because when you go to sell the business someday, the person coming in isn't going to want to own Christopher Norton Investments, and they're going to have to change it. And Kitces was like, so change it. Who cares? And I was like, understand that when you do that, now you are amplifying the problem of this person's leaving the business and this person's coming in, and it's the same business, and you can continue to trust us and all the things that you go through when a business changes hands, but now you're also changing the name on top of it. And he was like, I don't think it matters. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And it wasn't until his own followers started chiming in and saying, Michael, I wish more than anything that I had never named the firm after myself, because all I did was create landmines for myself later on. And then conversely, other people were saying, I wish I hadn't bought a business name after the founder. It just created so much more work, and we lost so many things because we not only had to take over the business, we had to change the name of it. So one small example, but I think this is incredibly important for advisors to think about the longevity of their brand. And I know that ego comes into play sometimes, and you're like, well, I'm going to be the next Carson or Hilton or Marriott, and I'm going to have a name that's going to last generations, and maybe.
I mean, you won't.
But most of the time you won't. And it's better to think about how you can build something to last that's not just named after a person. And like I said, I truly believe that your brand is every interaction that someone has with your firm. But I do think there's a starting point. And I mentioned this idea of brand messaging. But the way that I approached every client that I ever worked with was, let's start with defining your brand messaging. How do you talk about yourselves? How do you think your clients perceive you? How do you give your 30-second elevator pitch? How does the other person in your office? Are you doing it the same way? Are you talking about the same things? And then, filtering down from there. How are we going to talk about the products that we serve, that we offer? How are we going to serve our clients? Write all of these things down and create a playbook for yourself on, this is how we're going to talk about our company. And it doesn't have to be a sophisticated thing. It doesn't have to be in a bound book that you hand out to staff. It can just be a working document that lives on your server that you update from time to time. But you want to come back to it, because as time goes on, it's easy to create the kind of mess that we created for ourselves at Potomac. And that document can, grow to include, these are the colors we're always going to use. This is how you can and cannot use our logo, things like that. But I think it's a document that everybody should have. And we want to, instead of offering you marketing services, give you essentially a template to create one of these things yourself. So it's literally the document that I used to use in all of my meetings with clients that I'm just going to give you, so that you can sit down and kind of go through the questions and write out for yourself how you want to talk about your firm collectively as an organization. I'm going to ask our producer, Martina, to drop a link to it into the chat, but you can also scan this QR code, and it'll just take you to a page where you can download the document.
And just to chime in here, I think it's important, because we had these conversations early on, back in 2019 about brand and defining who you are as a firm. And some of the things that came, and they evolve over time. Some of the things that came from those early conversations were things like transparency, right? Given our industry and where we are in terms of money management, there's a lot of fintech and TAMPs out there that will give you the same pitches over and over again in press releases, right? Holistic, fiduciary, client, blah, 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 blah. And we always took the approach, like we wanted to be super transparent and open the books on how we run the business, how we manage money. And those things have permeated through the years. It started with just a conversation with Christopher and myself about brand, about what we want to be known for. And we've routinely over the years then doubled down on that concept, right? And it's evolved and gone in different places. But it's important to nail the starting point. But don't get too caught up in it, because things change over time. You know, we always laugh about the things that we've changed and done a 180 on. We're sitting in the lobby of the office that we are about to tour. So, you know, things change. But anyway, that starting point to you know, when you look at this document, you know, don't get too caught up in nailing it the first time. Just, it's called a starting point for a reason.
And it's why, you know, it's why I started with those examples of companies like Bacardi and McDonald's, and obviously those are big international brands, but this is work that's never done. This is something that you should come back to regularly, and you can protect the longevity of your brand and the identity and update it from time to time, and you should. It's not a set it and forget it thing, just like investments, right? This is something that's going to continue to evolve over time, and I think everybody should do that.
Well, I mean, as a financial advisor, right? Like, let's say you start with, you know, you handhold every client relationship. Well, that's fine and dandy at 5 and 10 million, but you know, if you start really, really growing, you know, that's going to change and adjust over time.
Absolutely. I am not going to be the marketer that forgot to put up the disclosure screen, so there it is. If anybody has any questions or anything that you know, they would like to ask, please throw it in the chat. You know, we're also available, especially me. You know, if you have specific branding questions and you want to reach out to me afterwards, my contact information is on our website, so I'm not hard to find. I'm also easy to find on LinkedIn. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope this was valuable. And I thought, you know, this is just part of us being transparent at Potomac. You know, we're not trying to sell anything here. This is a journey that we've been through. We learned a lot. We wanted to share it with you, and hopefully you can take some things away from it. Manish, you want the last word?
Do not reach out to me.
Perfect outro. And with that, goodbye.